Do you think you know Snow White, the jealous stepmother, the 7 dwarfs, the poisoned apple, the prince's kiss? Everything you've been told is wrong. The original wasn't written for children. It was written to document crimes so terrible that people couldn't speak about them directly. And today, the evidence that's been hiding in plain sight for over 200 years is about to be revealed. By the end of this video, you'll never look at this fairy tale the same way again. Because what's hidden inside isn't fantasy. It's a crime scene. The Brothers Grimm's original 1812 manuscripts, preserved in the Berlin State Library, contain details that have been systematically erased from every modern retelling. Court records from medieval Germany, mining archives from the 1600s, toxicology reports on noble women who died mysteriously, legal documents about execution methods. All of it connects to this one fairy tale. Folklorists have known this for decades, but it rarely reaches public awareness. Historians discuss it in academic circles, and the entertainment industry has spent billions ensuring these connections remain obscured. But the evidence exists, and it paints a picture of medieval Germany that's far darker than any Disney adaptation could suggest. This is what Snow White really is. The first revelation appears in the original German text. In the Brothers Grimm's 1812 manuscript, the villain isn't a stepmother at all. It's Snow White's biological mother. The handwriting is clear. Jacob Grimm wrote Die Mutter, not stepmother, simply mother. This woman orders her huntsman to take her 7-year-old daughter into the forest and kill her. But the demand doesn't stop at death. She specifies which organs must be returned as proof: the lungs and liver. And when the huntsman delivers what he claims are Snow White's organs, he actually kills a wild boar and substitutes those instead. The mother doesn't dispose of them. The original text states explicitly, the cook had to boil them in salt, and the wicked woman ate them up, believing she was devouring her own child's essence. She consumed what she believed were her 7-year-old daughter's internal organs. The Grimms altered this detail in their 1819 edition, transforming the biological mother into a stepmother. Modern scholars attribute this change to commercial pressure. Publishers deemed maternal cannibalism unprintable, but the modification obscures what the tale was actually preserving. The brothers weren't inventing horror. They were transcribing oral histories from elderly peasant women. These were accounts passed down through generations. Cross-referencing with European folklore reveals the same pattern across cultures. From Russia to Ireland, documented tales of mothers consuming their daughters exist. Folklorists now recognize these stories emerged from genuine fears about what mothers did to daughters who threatened their social position. This wasn't creative fiction. This was preserved testimony. Understanding why a mother would murder her daughter requires examining medieval German social structures. Young noblewomen functioned as political assets, not autonomous individuals. Their beauty determined their value in marriage alliances. They were commodities subject to strategic trade. The power dynamic shifted dangerously when a daughter's beauty surpassed her mother's. The mother's influence, derived from her ability to broker marriages and maintain court relationships, suddenly faced competition from her own bloodline. Historical records provide concrete examples. Bavarian court documents from the 16th century detail the case of Margareta von Waldeck. A young countess of exceptional beauty, she was betrothed to Philip II of Spain, a match that would have elevated her significantly above her mother's status. Weeks later, a mysterious illness struck. Contemporary court physicians documented symptoms that modern toxicologists identify as consistent with mercury poisoning. She died. Her mother inherited both the dowry and the right to negotiate a new alliance with the prince's family. No investigation followed. The father declared it God's will standing to gain substantial lands from his wife's revised negotiations. This pattern repeats throughout historical archives. Young noble women dying under suspicious circumstances immediately before or after major marriage negotiations, always benefiting the mother, always ruled as natural causes or divine intervention. Medieval German women of noble birth understood this reality. Beauty could trigger elimination by the person responsible for one's existence. The next element reveals how this transfer of power was recognized and announced. The magic mirror in Snow White carried specific meaning for medieval audiences that modern readers miss entirely. Large, clear mirrors in 15th and 16th century Germany represented massive wealth, often costing more than entire estates. These weren't vanity objects, they were political instruments. The ability to maintain one's appearance directly correlated with maintaining court position. Beauty functioned as literal currency in noble society. When the mirror declares Snow White the fairest, it's not delivering a compliment. It's announcing a transfer of power. The statement informs the queen that her daughter has become more politically valuable than she is. In this context, the declaration functions as a death sentence. The specific organs demanded, lungs and liver, carry significance rooted in medieval folklore. The lungs were believed to contain the breath of life, the essence of youth itself. The liver housed the soul's vitality and physical beauty. The queen's desire extends beyond eliminating Snow White. She seeks to consume the physical sources of her daughter's beauty and youth. Anthropologists identify this practice as symbolic vampirism, the belief that consuming another's organs transfers their qualities to the consumer. This wasn't invented folklore. Historical records document nobles engaging in this practice, believing in its efficacy. The superstition existed as accepted knowledge in certain circles of medieval society. The tales encoding of this practice suggest the Grimms were preserving accounts of actual events, not creating sensational fiction. The seven dwarfs represent perhaps the most carefully encoded element of the entire tale. Modern audiences imagine Disney's singing characters. The original German text describes something entirely different. Mining archives from the Hessian regions, the precise areas where the Grimms collected this tale, contain records from the 1600s describing Kleinenbergleute. The term translates literally as small mountain people. These weren't mythical beings. They were children, specifically child miners. Medieval German mining operations utilized children as young as 7 because their small bodies could navigate tunnels impossible for adults. They worked in passages barely 3 feet high, crawling on hands and knees through spaces filled with toxic fumes and coal dust. Mining archives from the town of Siegen, dated 1618, document the outcomes. Survivors, and survival rates were low, emerged permanently stunted. Growth arrested completely from chronic malnutrition and the constant pressure of rock overhead. Spines curved from years of crouching. Skin turned pallid from sunlight deprivation. One historical account describes their appearance as mushroom-like, pale, stunted, and adapted to darkness. These child miners slept in communal barracks located deep in forests, deliberately hidden from the towns whose wealth they extracted from the earth. Local girls, typically runaways or orphans, maintained these communities in exchange for protection and shelter. When Snow White arrives at a cottage and immediately begins cooking and cleaning for 7 small men who labour underground all day and return covered in grime, medieval audiences would have recognised this arrangement instantly. She wasn't cohabitating with magical creatures. She had joined a community of society's most exploited children and assumed the role of their housekeeper to ensure survival. The 7 dwarfs were real. They were the most systematically abused children in medieval German society, and Snow White had become one of them. This recognition illuminates what the forest actually represented in the tale. The forest in Snow White functions as more than physical geography. It represents a psychological space that medieval listeners would have understood immediately. Consider the practical reality. A young girl flees an abusive household. Her options are severely limited. Returning home means certain death. Seeking legal protection is impossible. Parents functioned as their children's legal guardians under medieval law. The legal system offered no recourse. Surviving independently is unfeasible for a 7-year-old child. Mining communities represented one of the few locations in medieval Germany where authorities didn't patrol and questions remained unasked. The forest wasn't enchanted. It was lawless territory where society's rejected population survived. The Brothers Grimm preserved what functioned as a medieval underground network, a survival system operating in the shadows of legitimate society. They disguised it as a fairy tale cottage, ensuring the knowledge would persist, even if readers didn't comprehend what they were encountering. The mother's subsequent murder attempts reveal how thoroughly the Grimms understood medieval crime. The Queen makes 3 attempts on Snow White's life. These appear to modern readers as arbitrary fairy tale events. Research into medieval crime methodology reveals each follows a pattern criminologists recognize as escalating predatory behavior. First attempt, bodice laces. The Queen disguises herself as a peddler selling common household items, an unremarkable transaction. She uses the laces to suffocate Snow White by tightening them beyond tolerance. The dwarfs return home, cut the laces, and Snow White revives. This represents an actual method. Strangulation disguised as corset accident. Historical records show this occurred frequently to young women, with near impossibility of proving intentionality versus accident. Second attempt, a poisoned comb. The significance extends beyond the weapon itself. In medieval noble households, combs weren't simple grooming implements. They were intimate objects frequently passed from mother to daughter, carrying familial significance. A mother combing her daughter's hair constituted a daily bonding ritual. By transforming this symbol of maternal care into a weapon, the tale explicitly demonstrates what it has been suggesting throughout: the complete perversion of the mother-daughter relationship. Every gesture of affection potentially masks an attack. The third attempt, the apple, connects to documented medieval poisoning practices that are genuinely disturbing. The apple in Snow White exhibits specific characteristics: red on one side, white on the other, with poison only on the red portion. The Queen cuts it in half, consumes the white side to demonstrate safety, then offers Snow White the poisoned red half. This appears to be pure invention. Historical documents prove otherwise. Medieval poisoners employed a technique called Judas fruits. These were genuine practice. Apples or other fruits were partially injected with poison, using methods designed to allow the poisoner to consume part of the fruit, establishing an alibi, while the victim consumed the poisoned portion. Italian diplomats in the 1400s wrote explicit warnings to their allies about Judas fruits. The name references Judas Iscariot, the betrayer who shared bread with Christ before his betrayal. The scenario played out repeatedly. A feast in a German castle, circa 1485. The hostess selects an apple, cuts it with her personal knife, consumes half while offering the remainder to her rival. Hours later, long after the hostess has retired with witnesses confirming her good health, the victim begins convulsing. The symptoms Snow White displays match documented effects with remarkable precision. immediate paralysis, preservation of beauty, lips remaining red, skin staying fresh. The appearance of death while potentially maintaining minimal life signs. Toxicological analysis confirms these symptoms align exactly with concentrated belladonna extract effects. Deadly nightshade grew abundantly in German forests. Medieval populations understood its effects thoroughly. Belladonna causes pupil dilation, creating an appearance of wide-eyed beauty. It paralyzes musculature. It reduces heart rate to nearly imperceptible levels. The victim appears deceased while potentially retaining minimal physiological function. This wasn't fantasy invention. This was documented medieval poison methodology. The tale's encoding of this technique leads to one of its most disturbing elements, the handling of Snow White's body. When Snow White lies in her glass coffin, apparently dead but perfectly preserved, modern audiences interpret this as pure fairy tale fantasy. Glass coffins existed. Historical records document noble families across Europe commissioning crystal or glass-topped coffins, specifically for young women who died under suspicious circumstances, particularly when inheritance or succession was contested. These coffins served 3 distinct purposes, all strategically calculated. First, they provided irrefutable proof the heir was deceased. This prevented claims she had been concealed or remained alive elsewhere, eliminating succession challenges. Second, they displayed her beauty posthumously. Her body became a calculated advertisement of the family's genetic value for future marriage negotiations involving surviving daughters. Third, the glass prevented close examination of the body for evidence of foul play. It created a physical barrier between the deceased and anyone who might question the death circumstances. When Snow White lies in that crystal coffin, she joins a documented pattern of noble daughters whose deaths enriched their families and whose bodies became public displays of private crimes. What follows, the prince's arrival, reveals an element Disney categorically erased. The Disney adaptation depicts the prince kissing Snow White, breaking the spell with true love. The original Grimm text describes something categorically different. A prince sees Snow White's corpse in the glass coffin and develops an obsession with it, specifically with her deceased body. He becomes so fixated that he convinces the dwarfs to surrender the coffin. He then orders his servants to transport it everywhere, allowing him constant access to gaze upon her. Modern psychology has terminology for this: necrophilic fixation, obsession with death and deceased bodies. Eventually, servants grow frustrated with constantly transporting the coffin. One stumbles. The jostle dislodges the apple fragment from Snow White's throat. She revives, not from love, not from a kiss, but from accidental mechanical action following treatment as an object of morbid fascination. Earlier versions contain an even more disturbing detail. A servant, angry about constantly carrying the coffin, strikes Snow White's back in frustration. That blow dislodges the apple. She functioned as a burden even in apparent death. The wedding that follows delivers the tale's final encoded message about medieval justice. At Snow White's wedding, the evil queen receives an invitation to attend. Upon arrival, recognizing Snow White, she's immediately seized. The punishment follows. She's forced to don red-hot iron shoes and dance until death. Modern audiences interpret this as grotesque fantasy violence. Historical records reveal this specific execution method was real. It was codified in medieval German law for one particular category of crime, attempted matricide or the murder of one's biological children. This wasn't standard capital punishment. It was theatrical justice designed to demonstrate that certain crimes violated natural order so fundamentally they required supernatural retribution. When the evil queen faces this fate in Snow White, every medieval listener would have immediately understood the legal significance. Her crime was recognized as maximally heinous, the destruction of one's own bloodline. The tale was delivering justice that real mothers who murdered their daughters rarely faced in actual courts. The Grimms weren't simply telling a story. They were pronouncing the verdict the legal system wouldn't deliver. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm's primary training wasn't in folklore collection. They were educated as legal scholars. Their professional background would have granted them access to court records. They would have known about investigations that concluded without resolution. Young girls dying under circumstances that benefited their mothers politically. Mothers who inherited their daughters' dowries and marriage prospects. Maria Tatar, a Harvard folklorist who dedicated decades to studying the Grimm manuscripts, discovered something significant. In the margins of their working notes, the brothers inscribed Mahnung und Warnung, translating as reminder and warning. The intent wasn't entertainment. It was preservation of knowledge regarding actual crimes too horrific for direct discussion. Recent academic research by scholar Victoria Duda uncovered additional marginal notes. These suggest the Grimms actively collected testimonies from elderly women who claimed to remember true versions of the tale transmitted from their grandmothers. These oral histories, fragments preserved in university archives, consistently emphasize identical elements. The mother, not stepmother, as antagonist. The specific organs demanded. Mining communities as refugee. Most significantly, repeated insistence that this happened or this was real. The brothers Grimm weren't collecting folklore for cultural preservation. They were documenting testimony. They were encoding historical crimes into narrative form designed to survive even if legal documentation was destroyed or suppressed. They wrapped horrific reality in sufficient fantasy to make it transmissible. But they preserved enough truth that anyone examining closely could identify the warning embedded within. Once the Grimm's documentation intent becomes clear, every detail demands re-examination. Even the numerical elements in the tale carried specific significance. 7 dwarfs, 3 murder attempts, 1 apple divided into 2 halves. These weren't arbitrary selections. In medieval numerology and Germanic lore, these numbers conveyed precise meanings. 7 represented completion or perfection. 7 deadly sins. 7 virtues. 7 days of creation. Snow White's duration with the dwarfs constituted a complete cycle of concealment. 3 attempts at murder corresponded to legal precedent. Under Germanic law, 3 murder attempts elevated the crime to high treason when the intended victim possessed noble blood. This legal principle would have been recognized by anyone familiar with court proceedings. The bifurcated apple, white and red, safe and poisoned, embodied the duality the entire narrative explores. The mother who should protect but destroys. Beauty that should be celebrated but provokes murder. The home that should provide safety but becomes the source of ultimate danger. The most devastating detail appears in earliest versions, but was progressively edited from subsequent editions. Snow White's age. In the original 1812 version, Snow White is 7 years old when her mother first attempts to kill her. 7 years old. This matches precisely the age children entered mining servitude. The same age Germanic law permitted betrothal. The identical age young noble girls began appearing in historical documents as victims of mysterious illnesses that politically benefited their mothers. This wasn't a narrative about an adolescent threatened by stepmother vanity. This documented systematic child abuse, encoded and preserved in a transmissible form designed to survive generations. The brothers Grimm, with their legal training, would have examined court records. They knew about young girls who disappeared or died under circumstances that enriched their mothers. They couldn't prosecute these crimes. Perpetrators possessed excessive power. The system was fundamentally compromised. They chose the alternative available to them. They preserved evidence in story form, designed to survive centuries. Even Snow White's physical description, skin white as snow, lips red as blood, hair black as ebony, transcends poetic language. These constituted the precise features marking a young woman as valuable in medieval Germanic marriage markets. Pale skin proved she didn't perform outdoor labour, establishing noble status. Red lips indicated vitality and fertility. Black hair signified youth, as hair greyed with age. Snow White is marked from birth as valuable property. The tale demonstrates how that value converts her into a target. This explains why the tale exists across multiple cultures. Versions appear from Italy, Russia, Scotland, Africa, Malaysia. But the German version collected by the Grimms uniquely encodes specific medieval dangers with systematic precision. Italian versions contain enchanted sleep, but no cannibal mother. Scottish versions feature stepmother antagonists, but omit the mirror. Only the German version combines all elements: biological mother, cannibalism, specific organs, mining communities, glass coffin, necrophilic prints, iron shoes. The Grimms weren't recording folklore for cultural preservation. They were preserving fragments of documented crimes. The transformation of this tale into children's entertainment represents one of history's most successful erasure operations. Disney's 1937 film eliminated every warning element systematically. The biological mother became unambiguously a stepmother. The dwarfs transformed into comic relief with individual names and personalities. The prince's necrophilic obsession became true love's kiss. Snow White converted from a 7-year-old abuse victim into a singing teenager fantasizing about romance. The sanitization achieved such completeness that modern audiences remain entirely unaware they're consuming a story originally documenting systematic child abuse and attempted filicide. Yet darkness persists even in sanitized versions. Children instinctively recognize something fundamentally wrong. They ask questions. Why does the mother want Snow White dead? Why must she live with strangers? Why does the prince love someone he believes is dead? These questions identify cognitive dissonance, created when horror testimony is disguised as children's entertainment. The darkness persists because it's structural to the narrative. Removing it causes complete narrative collapse. Snow White isn't a bedtime story. It's not romance. It's not a tale about jealousy, vanity, or true love. It's a crime scene preserved in narrative form, evidence disguised as entertainment. The fairest of them all was never about beauty contests. It documented a child marked for death because her value threatened her mother's political power. The magic wasn't supernatural. It was murder methodology. The dwarfs weren't fantasy creatures. They were exploited children. The forest wasn't enchanted. It was the only refuge for victims. The glass coffin wasn't romantic preservation. It was a barrier preventing justice. And the mother who orchestrated everything. She wasn't a fictional villain. She represented real women who, trapped in systems valuing them solely for their ability to broker power through beauty and marriage, redirected that violence toward their own daughters. Somewhere in medieval Germany, young girls died under mysterious circumstances, benefiting their mothers. Somewhere, mothers poisoned daughters. Somewhere, glass coffins were commissioned for concealment rather than romance. Somewhere, children worked themselves to death in mines while runaway girls maintained their households. Two legal scholars recognized this pattern and preserved it through the only method available, converting testimony into tale, evidence into entertainment, warning into fairy tale. The evidence is clear. Snow White wasn't a fairy tale. It was documented testimony about child murder, exploitation, and maternal violence in medieval Germany. The Brothers Grimm preserved crimes the legal system refused to prosecute. When someone claims this is just a children's story, the evidence proves otherwise. Snow White was 7 years old when her mother first attempted to kill her. The dwarfs were child labourers with arrested growth. The poisoned apple utilised documented medieval poison techniques. The glass coffin represented real medieval practice. The iron shoes constituted real medieval punishment. None of this is fantasy. Snow White is what remains when crimes too terrible to prosecute are encoded into stories too compelling to forget. If this video transformed your understanding of fairy tales, subscribe for more dark origins analysis. Hansel and Gretel documents famine cannibalism. Sleeping Beauty encodes something even more disturbing. Comment below with which fairy tale should be investigated next, and share which discovery from this video was most disturbing. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight for over 200 years. The next time those famous words appear, "Mirror, mirror on the wall," the truth is now clear. It's a warning, it's testimony, it's a crime scene preserved as entertainment. Thanks for watching.